What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and like 2 years ago, right, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I did a live stream on the Comics Explained Twitch channel, which I'll link to the video in particular that I'm referencing, but I basically laid out how it is we could introduce Wolverine into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and to a larger degree, how we could introduce mutants. Now, a lot of the more recent revelations from like WandaVision, the fact that Wanda's basically had powers ever since she was a little girl, the prevailing theory that's been very, very popular right now, which is that Wanda is actually a mutant. It's something that nobody seems to know it, not even she really knows it. A lot of that seems to, at least to a degree, flew in the face of what I had come up with, but a lot of what I've theorized would still actually work. In terms of the origins of mutants, maybe not, right? In terms of like how to bring Wolverine into the MCU, absolutely, but it could very much tie into the origin of mutants as well, and we'll talk about that once we get towards the end of this video, specifically when it came to Baron von Strucker, Wanda, Pietro, that kind of stuff. So here's what I want to do. The first thing I want to establish, and I'm not going to run over each individual item, but I want to establish that I'm going to be pulling elements from different aspects of Marvel Comics, from the Ultimate Universe, from the main Marvel Universe, different things like that, and sort of condense it all down, but I'll make it super easy. So here's the idea behind this. Let's go back to Captain America, the First Avenger, and let's also invoke Captain America, the Winter Soldier. What do we know about Captain America, the First Avengers, right? That Steve Rogers was a kid that really wanted to fight against the Axis forces during World War II, but he was too small, too skinny. He ended up becoming the first successful candidate for the Super Soldier Serum that was created by Abraham Erskine, who didn't lose his mind and become a villain, and then he became Captain America. He fought in World War II for a little while, he almost banged Peggy Carter, and then he was basically frozen in a block of ice for 70 years. Roll credits. Now, let's move on to Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Now, what do we know referencing Captain America and the Winter Soldier? We know that after the perceived death of Steve Rogers, the mission had to go on. And that what happened is that Peggy Carter and Howard Stark and Chester Phillips formed the Strategic Science Reserve, or Strategic Scientific Reserve. I can't remember which one is which, but regardless, they formed the organization that would eventually go on to become S.H.I.E.L.D. The other thing we know is that from Arnim Zola, Hydra started regrowing in the SSR and eventually S.H.I.E.L.D., all the way to the point that by the 1960s, 1970s, Hydra had been completely in control of S.H.I.E.L.D. Remember, one of the things that Arnim Zola said is that for decades, they've been sowing conflict, reaping war. So it's not as though Hydra hadn't fully assumed control of S.H.I.E.L.D. until we got to the events of Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and like Robert Redford's character and all that kind of stuff. No. They've been doing it for a long time. It's just no one had known about it. So let's say that since the 1960s, Hydra had basically been manipulating things, had been like in full control of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, this is important because let's say that with Hydra being in control of S.H.I.E.L.D., one of the things that Hydra wanted to do was create more Captain Americas. But with Abraham Erskine being dead and Steve Rogers being frozen in a block of ice, but being assumed dead, there was no conceivable means to duplicate that. But what they ended up doing by whatever manner and whatever means is they said, we're gonna try to create more Captain Americas. We're gonna try to create things that are better than Captain America, and they will be agents of Hydra. So they can infiltrate society, or they can help us basically conquer the world, whatever the case happens to be. And so what they did is they formed something called Weapons Plus. And Weapons Plus was basically the umbrella project. Under that, you had Weapon 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, running all the way up to Weapon 10, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Now, let's say that with Hydra operating and basically controlling S.H.I.E.L.D. in the 1960s, 1970s, and 80s and 90s, that in the 60s per se, this was the age of the Cold War, right? This was the age of like the spy game. Technically, the Cold War had been going on since like the end of World War II, so we'll say from like the early 1950s, basically going until about the 80s. But regardless, the Cold War was the age of spies. And so let's say that with Hydra controlling S.H.I.E.L.D., while they did have all kinds of agents, what they also had were just Black Ops wet work teams. These were teams that, as far as their mission was concerned, was to go and infiltrate some dictator somewhere who had gotten his hands on some kind of a nuclear device, or some crazy fanatic somewhere who gotten his hands on like a dirty bomb. Whatever it was, that was the mission that they were officially told, right? That was their story. What was really happening here is they were being sent into various places to take out people who were credible threats to Hydra. All this time, Hydra has Weapons Plus, and Hydra's got Weapon 1, and they got Weapon 2 and Weapon 3, and they're doing stuff like bonding cybernetic implants to animals, right? Or bonding them to people, or experimenting with drugs in terms of like, what is it, Frank Simpson, Nuke, right? He takes the red, white, and blue pills to like amp him up to keep him stable or bring him down, different things along those lines, right? Like Nuke, you guys may remember, or Frank Simpson, you may remember from like the Jessica Jones TV show, the blonde guy who kept popping all those pills, and if he didn't, he'd lose his mind, like that guy, right? He's actually a Weapons Plus project in Marvel Comics. Now, the important thing here is that among all these different teams, there's one guy who stands out in particular, who's ridiculously capable, right? As far as we're aware, he has no powers. And in fact, we can say he has no powers, that at this point in time, Wolverine in his life has no healing factor, he's got no claws, he's just that damn good at being a spy, right? It's like he's got a natural aptitude for espionage, for stealth and guile, for just killing people, right? It's almost like an ingrained part of him. And Hydra notices this, and Hydra's like, okay, we need this guy. We're gonna bring this guy in. Like, this guy's gonna be the next test subject for our Weapons Plus project, whatever it happens to be, right? Whatever form it takes. It just happens to be, this guy is the 10th test subject, also known as Weapon X. And so what this does is it basically brings Wolverine into that actual name. Now, here's the kicker to this, that as Hydra is experimenting on him and studying his genes and all that kind of stuff, they realize there's a gene in his body that is dormant, and they have no idea what it represents. It doesn't match any known database on the planet. There's nothing in the discovery of the human genome that says anything about this particular gene. It's almost like it's not even of this earth. Now, kind of a sidetrack here, we can say that it was put there by the Celestials or whatever it is, but in effect, this is his mutant gene. Hydra, not knowing what it is, activates it. And that's when Wolverine gets bone claws, and that's when Wolverine gets his healing factor. And so it's like, okay, so cool. We kind of have like the framework of Wolverine. The big question we have to ask here is, how do we go from Wolverine being a guy with bone claws and a healing factor to Wolverine having adamantium bonded to his skeleton? Enter Myron McClane. Okay, who's Myron McClane? In Marvel Comics, Myron McClane was a metallurgist. So let's walk away from this theory for a second and let's focus on the comics for a second. So in Marvel Comics during World War II, Captain America and the Invaders, so the original Human Torch Jim Hammond, Namor the Submariner, Bucky Barnes, they fought alongside the Wakandans, helping to fend off German forces. And that as a result of this, there were two things that came out of it. The first is that Captain America realized the Wakandans used circular shields, unlike his shield, which at the time was in the shape of an iron. The benefit of using a circular shield is that yes, it could be used for defense to block attacks, things like that, but they could also throw it. It could be an offensive weapon. The other thing that came out of this is that as thanks for his efforts in helping them defeat the Germans, Captain America was given a small shard of vibranium by the Wakandans. And so when he came back to the United States, he told the federal government, make me a new shield, make it round, and put this vibranium in it. And so the government contracted out to Myron McClane, who was a metallurgist. Myron McClane took that vibranium, basically started building a new shield, and much like the discovery of penicillin, fell asleep during the process. When he woke up, Captain America's shield was created, but it was not just a vibranium shield. It was a vibranium iron alloy shield. The issue with this is that Myron McClane didn't readily know that. So what he did is he tried to duplicate Captain America's shield and accidentally created adamantium in the process. Now, back into our theory. How do we introduce adamantium into the Marvel Cinematic Universe? We use Wakanda. And here's the reason why. If you guys remember from Iron Man 2, that scene at the end of the movie when Tony Stark is talking to Nick Fury and there's the map behind him, and basically it shows all the different points where there are people with essentially powers, right? Beings of interest, right? Places of interest to S.H.I.E.L.D. itself. That you had the Atlantic Ocean, which of course was a direct reference to Atlantis, i.e. Namor the Submariner. There was also one in Africa. Basically, S.H.I.E.L.D. knew about Wakanda. Now, we can't invoke Ulysses Klaue because Ulysses Klaue did not successfully invade Wakanda and steal vibranium until 1992. We're still talking about the 1960s, maybe the 1970s, so 20 years before that ever happened. Here's the kicker. We don't know how long S.H.I.E.L.D. had known about Wakanda. We don't know if S.H.I.E.L.D. only discovered Wakanda because technology in the 2000s going forward had become sufficiently advanced enough to where they could even detect it, or if they had known about Wakanda for a long time, but were just never able to get in. Maybe they were, who knows, who cares? The important thing here is whether they knew about Wakanda and were trying to find a way to duplicate vibranium, or if Myra McLean was simply just a Hydra metallurgist, right, a Hydra agent who was just trying to find some way to create a super advanced metal. The end result is we land on adamantium. And so circling back, once Hydra activates this secret gene of Wolverine and then basically realize he has a healing factor and he's got bone claws, they bond adamantium to a skeleton, they try to basically turn him into an agent, and he ends up escaping, and the rest is history, right? He just kind of goes forward and does his own thing. Now, having said all that, here's the biggest takeaway from all this, right? Because that's just Wolverine, right? Here's the biggest takeaway from all of this. If we really want to tie this into like Wanda and Pietro and all that kind of stuff, what we do is we say that this whole thing, right? Because up until that point, Baron von Strucker and them, like one of the things he said is that there are multiple Hydra agencies around the world who are basically conducting the exact same experiment that he's doing. Maybe not using the Mind Stone, because as far as we're aware, there's only one of those. But Sokovia is seemingly not the only place where Hydra detected genetic abnormalities. What this does in terms of them like discovering Wolverine, activating Wolverine's gene, discovering that he has powers, is it lends a basis and an explanation to why it is that Baron von Strucker and the rest of Hydra are going to places where they discover people with genetic abnormalities and then taking them and activating those genes. That the Mind Stone is what Baron von Strucker used because perhaps it's the most effective, right? Maybe it's the easiest thing. We don't really know. The plot demanded it, like it really matters. But this explains why it is that he knew to activate the genes of Pietro, and he knew to activate, or at least believed he was activating the gene of Wanda. That in turn, of course, pushed her powers and that kind of thing. But basically, it gives us the origin of Wolverine, and it gives us an explanation of other people around the world all having these genetic abnormalities, but in effect, they're all basically mutants with X genes that simply haven't been activated yet. It also neatly ties into Wanda gaining her powers in the sense that her powers activated almost in the exact same way they do occasionally in Marvel Comics, which is through like moments of duress. We talked about that in our previous video. Moments of high duress led to her powers being activated, right? So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section, right? I mean, do you think this works? Like, do you think this theory works? Because when I was streaming it a couple years ago, people loved it. They were like, dude, this is amazing. Like, dude, this theory is perfect. You should be working for Marvel, man. Like, if Marvel doesn't use this idea, it's a terrible thing. Let me know what you guys think. Of course, I can also count on you guys to just punch holes, to just Swiss cheese this theory. I could totally count on you guys to do that. I imagine some of you guys are already typing away, right? And that's why I love you guys, because you guys make my theories better. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section, and I will catch you all later. Peace. Or wait a minute. Peace. There we go.